Welcome back everyone. Today, we're continuing with the next part of this series, called What If Goku Remembered the Saiyans? My name is Ash. Please, for me, drop a like and subscribe to the page. Also leave your comments down below. With that, let's begin. As Vegeta strode forward to claim his wish from the towering dragon, he couldn't hold back his grin. His dream of immortality was just within reach. Now it's time to make my wish, he said, his voice confident. But Krillin moved to block him, his expression grim. I'm not so sure about this, Vegeta. Vegeta's face twisted with irritation as he glared at Krillin. You don't have a choice, Baldy. Either I get my wish or you die. It's that simple. Krillin's eyes narrowed and his aura suddenly flared, radiating a powerful red light that surprised even himself. Vegeta staggered back, feeling the sudden surge of energy from the human, his power level rising far beyond anything he'd sensed before. How? Vegeta stammered, disbelief coloring his voice. Krillin chuckled, his eyes alight with confidence. I've been training a lot. So now, Vegeta, you're not exactly in a position to be making demands. Denda, watching the standoff with wide eyes, asked, what's the third wish going to be? Vegeta's scowl deepened. I already told you, wish for my immortality, so I can crush Frieza and end this once and for all. Krillin's stance hardened. No, I won't. But before the argument could continue, Porunga's massive luminous form began to fade. The brilliant light of the dragon dimmed, and in seconds, Porunga vanished completely. The Dragon Balls, their once vibrant glow gone, turned to cold, lifeless stones, falling silent on the ground. Vegeta looked around, completely baffled. What just happened? Dende's expression filled with horror as he understood what had transpired. Guru's gone. Without another word, he turned and took off toward Guru's house, panic in his voice. No, this can't be. Vegeta still looked confused, glancing around at the others for answers. What does that mean? Why did the dragon just vanish? Tien's expression was somber as he explained. Guru was the creator of the Dragon Balls. If he passed away, then they're gone too, permanently. Just then, Tien's head snapped to the side, his senses flaring as he felt Frieza's energy skyrocket to an unfathomable level. Damn, he muttered, his fists clenching. He's getting even stronger. Krillin, too, felt the terrifying increase in power. And Kakarot's energy, it's dropping fast. He's giving it everything he has, but it's not enough. Frieza's still way too strong. Without hesitating, Tien took a step forward, his face filled with determination. I'm going to help him. I can't just stand by and let Kakarot take on Frieza alone. Vegeta scoffed, crossing his arms. You're no match for that monster. You're just rushing to your death. I've got to do what I can, Tien replied firmly, his voice steady. Krillin nodded, stepping up beside Tien. Me too. If we don't help him now, we may never get another chance. Vegeta watched as the two humans prepared to throw themselves into the fight of their lives. He clenched his fists, torn between pride and disbelief. How could he, the prince of all Saiyans, just stand there while two humans were willing to risk everything against the most powerful being in the universe? With a growl of determination, Vegeta launched himself into the air, chasing after the two Earthlings. Meanwhile, Bardock had landed at Guru's house, Raditz's limp form slung over his shoulder. He found the house almost empty. Only Bulma was there, a look of concern on her face. What happened? Bulma asked, her voice tense as she looked at Raditz's battered condition. Bardock shook his head, urgency in his voice. It's a long story, but he needs medical help, fast. Without hesitation, Bulma knelt down, pulling out a small first aid kit. She began wrapping bandages around Raditz's wounds, doing her best to stop the bleeding, but her hands shook as she worked, worry clouding her face. I hate to say it, Bardock, but it doesn't look good. He's lost too much blood. At that moment, Denda landed softly inside the house, noticing Raditz's weakened state. I can help, he said, stepping forward with quiet confidence. Bardock looked at the young Namekian, his brow furrowed. How? He asked, hope flickering in his eyes. Guru unlocked my ability to heal, Denda explained simply. He knelt beside Raditz, placing his small hands over the wounded Saiyan's chest. A soft green glow radiated from his palms, bathing Raditz in a warm light. Within moments, Raditz's wounds closed, and his color returned as strength seemed to flow back into him. Raditz blinked his eyes open, looking around in confusion. What happened? He asked, staring down at his hands, now free of pain. Bardock gave him a relieved smile. Ginyu did a number on you, but Dende here managed to heal you. It's like you were never even hurt." Bulma looked at Dende in awe, marveling at the young Namekian's ability. "That's incredible, Dende. You saved him." Raditz stood, testing his strength, then clenched his fists, feeling more powerful than ever. "I feel amazing. Actually, better than amazing." He turned, sensing the fierce energy signatures coming from the battlefield. His expression turned grim as he sensed his brother's fading power. "Kakarot," he muttered, his voice thick with worry. "What is it?" Bulma asked, picking up on the tension in his tone. Raditz's gaze was fixed in the distance. "Kakarot's power is dropping. He's giving it everything he has, but Frieza's still holding back. This fight, it's far from over, and I don't know how much longer he can last." Bardock placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his face set with determination. "Then we'll have to go help him. We can't let Kakarot face Frieza alone." Raditz nodded, his voice steady. "You're right." He looked back at Dende, who stood quietly by. "Come with us. We'll need you to heal Kakarot when we get there. I have a feeling he's about to take a real beating." Frieza moved forward with a slow, almost casual stride, his gaze fixed on Kakarot, who lay sprawled on the ground, bruised, bleeding, and struggling for breath. He had to give the Saiyans some credit. He had put up an impressive fight, but now the fierce warrior lay broken before him, utterly defeated. Frieza closed the distance, reaching down to grab Kakarot by the neck and hoisting him up effortlessly. He studied the battered fighter with a twisted smirk. "Stupid monkey," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. He drove his fist into Kakarot's stomach, and Kakarot's body convulsed as blood shot from his mouth, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. But Frieza wasn't finished. He kept punching, his relentless blows driving deeper into Kakarot's gut, each hit sending shockwaves of pain through the Saiyan's body. The tyrant's laughter echoed through the desolate landscape. "Now you're going to die," Frieza said, his voice cold and final. With a wicked grin, he wrapped his tail around Kakarot's neck, tightening it like a noose. Frieza extended one finger, gathering a small, lethal ball of energy at its tip. Without hesitation, he fired, the beam slicing through Kakarot's abdomen. Kakarot's scream of agony pierced the air as the energy tore through his flesh, leaving a smoking wound. Frieza chuckled, savoring the pain he'd inflicted. "Looks like I missed everything vital," he said mockingly, his laughter echoing. He fired another beam, this time piercing Kakarot's chest and puncturing a lung. Kakarot wheezed, his breath coming in shallow, strained gasps as he clutched at the wound. "Now," Frieza murmured, his finger glowing with a deadly light. "This next one will be through your heart." He aimed, relishing the final blow he was about to deliver. But before Frieza could unleash the fatal attack, a powerful energy blast came barreling in, hitting him with enough force to send him skidding backward, away from his wounded prey. Frieza growled, his eyes narrowing as he steadied himself and looked toward the source of the attack. A tall, imposing figure stood a few feet away, hand raised, green skin illuminated by his intense aura. The Namekian's eyes were fixed on Frieza with a look of calm defiance. "Now, it's my turn," the warrior said, his voice carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. Frieza's face twisted in annoyance as he took in his new opponent. He tossed Kakarot's limp form aside like a discarded doll and turned to fully face the intruder. "Another Namekian?" he scoffed. "Well, I suppose I can take a moment to deal with you as well." He raised his finger, firing a death beam aimed directly at the newcomer, but the Namekian barely moved. With a casual flick of his hand, he swatted the beam away, as if it were nothing more than a bothersome insect. Frieza's eyes widened in surprise, his amusement replaced by an edge of frustration. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice tinged with disbelief. A Namekian, able to deflect his attacks with such ease? The warrior took a step forward, his expression unyielding. "The name's Piccolo," he said, his voice steady and resolute, "and I'm here to end you." Frieza's shock melted into laughter. "Well, I've heard that before," he sneered, glancing briefly at Kakarot's bruised and battered form. "In fact, I'm fairly certain that this Saiyan said something along those lines just a few minutes ago." Piccolo didn't bother with a response. Instead, he charged, closing the gap between them in an instant. He moved like a shadow, swift and lethal, and drove his leg forward, aiming a powerful kick at Frieza's side. The tyrant barely managed to raise his arm to block, but the attack connected, slamming into his ribs with a force that sent Frieza staggering. Frieza recovered quickly, his eyes blazing with fury. He retaliated with a punch aimed directly at Piccolo's head. But Piccolo was ready, sidestepping the blow with effortless grace. He countered immediately, unleashing a barrage of kicks and punches, each strike precise and devastating. His fists blurred as he pushed Frieza back, not giving him a moment to breathe. The battlefield erupted with the sound of their collision, the impact of their blows creating shockwaves that rippled through the air and shook the ground beneath them. Frieza's grin faded, replaced by a look of growing frustration. He wasn't used to being pushed like this, least of all by a Namekian. But Piccolo pressed on, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination, his every movement displaying a new level of power and purpose. He was no longer just fighting for himself. He was fighting for his planet, for his people, and for the fallen. This battle was far from over. Frieza took a step back, chuckling as he observed Piccolo with a mocking glint in his eye. "I have to admit, you're strong," he said with a casual shrug, "but unfortunately for you, I've only been using a fraction of my true power." His smirk grew wider, flashing dangerously sharp teeth. Maybe it's time to kick things up a notch. Before Piccolo could even prepare himself, Frieza shot forward, moving with blinding speed. The tyrant's fist collided with Piccolo's stomach in an instant, faster than he could react. The force of the blow drove the air from Piccolo's lungs, and he doubled over, coughing up blood. Frieza didn't give him a chance to recover. He drove his knee up, slamming it into Piccolo's chin with enough force to snap his head back, his vision blurring from the impact. Piccolo felt himself starting to fly backward, but before he could get far, Frieza's tail coiled around his neck, tightening like a vice. As he struggled against Frieza's hold, Piccolo managed to gather enough energy to fire a blast straight at Frieza's face, but the tyrant didn't even flinch, letting the smoke clear with a smirk. When Piccolo saw Frieza's unscathed expression through the dissipating smoke, his eyes widened in shock. Frieza's laughter echoed around them, low and cold. "Do you understand now?" he taunted, backhanding Piccolo across the face. "Do you see how utterly pitiful you are?" Another backhand, harder this time, sent Piccolo's head snapping to the side. "You're nothing more than an insect to me." With a flick of his tail, Frieza hurled Piccolo into the air and raised a single finger, his smirk unwavering. He fired a series of death beams, each one piercing Piccolo's body, searing through muscle and flesh. Piccolo's screams filled the air as he plummeted to the ground with a heavy thud, his body riddled with bleeding wounds. Frieza strolled over, peering down at the bleeding Namekian with a look of disdain. "So many pests to swat, and so little time," he mused, gathering another death beam on his fingertip, this one aimed directly at Piccolo's heart. Not far away, Krillin and Tien landed, their expressions turning grim as they took in the scene. Piccolo was lying on the ground, battered and bleeding, his body barely moving, and a short distance away, Kakarot lay sprawled in a similar state, his breaths shallow and labored. Krillin swallowed hard. "This is bad," he said quietly, feeling the weight of hopelessness settle over him as he saw the state of his friends. Frieza's finger glowed brighter as he gathered energy for the killing blow on Piccolo. Tien clenched his fist. "We need to do something, Krillin. We can't just watch this happen." Krillin gave a determined nod, raising his hand above his head. A thin, sharp disc of energy formed, spinning with deadly precision. "Destructo disc," he shouted, hurling the disc straight at Frieza. Frieza paused, sensing something amiss. He turned just in time to see the energy disc hurtling toward him. His eyes widened in surprise, and he leapt out of the way, but not quite fast enough. The Destructo disc sliced through the tip of his tail, severing it from his body. Frieza let out an enraged scream, clutching the stump where his tail had once been, his face twisting in fury. He turned, his gaze zeroing in on Krillin and Tien, his eyes flashing with murderous intent. "Which one of you did that?" he snarled, his voice dangerously low. Neither Krillin nor Tien answered, holding their ground despite the growing terror. Frieza's lip curled into a snarl. "Fine, I'll just kill both of you." With a roar, Frieza shot forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. Krillin and Tien exchanged a brief, determined glance, their auras flaring bright red as they braced themselves for the fight of their lives. But Frieza was faster than either of them anticipated. In a split second, he phased in behind Krillin, driving his knee into the human's back with a sickening crunch. The force of the blow shattered Krillin's spine, his red aura flickering out as he fell to the ground. his body limp and unmoving. Tien's face was set in determination as he swung a powerful fist toward Frieza's face, pouring every bit of strength he could muster into the attack. With the Kaioken boosting his speed and power, he hoped it would at least rattle the tyrant. But Frieza merely vanished, leaving Tien's fist to strike nothing but air. Before Tien could react, Frieza reappeared behind him, his hand filled with energy. Frieza brought it down like a blade, slicing through Tien's neck in one swift, brutal motion. Tien's body fell forward, lifeless, as Frieza stood over him, a grin of satisfaction on his face. Frieza brushed his hands together, feeling a chilling sense of triumph. It was almost too easy. Exterminating these weaklings felt like nothing more than swatting flies. He turned his gaze toward Kakarot, who lay battered and barely moving on the ground, ready to finally rid himself of the troublesome Saiyan once and for all. Slowly, Frieza raised his foot, preparing to stomp out Kakarot's life. But just as he was about to bring his foot down, a blast struck his back, stopping him in his tracks. Annoyed, Frieza turned to see Vegeta standing defiantly, arm extended, his face tense and determined. Frieza's laughter filled the air. "Oh, that actually tickled," he mocked, brushing a speck of dust from his shoulder. Vegeta's face drained of color, realizing the futility of his attack. He had put everything he had into that blast, yet it hadn't even fazed Frieza. Swallowing down his fear, Vegeta held his ground as Frieza began to approach him with slow, menacing steps. Well, Vegeta," Frieza said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I thought I'd have to go looking for you. How convenient of you to come to me instead." In one smooth motion, Frieza raised a finger and fired a death beam directly into Vegeta's kneecap. The beam hit with pinpoint accuracy, and Vegeta crumpled to the ground, clutching his knee in agony. Frieza continued to close the distance, his steps deliberate, savoring the moment. "Now that you can't run, we can have a little chat, Prince." Frieza fired another death beam, this time into Vegeta's shoulder, sending waves of pain through his body. "It's a shame you had to betray me, Vegeta. We could have continued our arrangement," he smirked. "But even more of a shame that our last conversation was cut short." Gritting his teeth, Vegeta forced himself to his feet, swaying slightly as he tried to keep his weight off his injured knee. He glared up at Frieza, refusing to let the pain show in his eyes. "You might kill me, Frieza," he managed, his voice filled with defiance. "But someday, a Saiyan will be strong enough to bring you down." Frieza laughed, a harsh mocking sound. "Oh, Vegeta, how adorable. But in case you haven't noticed, there aren't exactly many Saiyans left to challenge me. Soon, there won't be any left at all." And with a final flick of his finger, he fired a beam straight through Vegeta's heart, silencing the Saiyan Prince forever. As Vegeta's body fell to the ground, Raditz landed nearby, his expression dark and unflinching as he faced down Frieza. The tyrant turned, barely sparing Raditz a glance. He chuckled, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Raditz," he sneered, "don't make me laugh. Out of all the Saiyans, you're the weakest. Do you really think you stand a chance?" Without hesitation, Frieza raised a finger, firing a quick beam in Raditz's direction. But Raditz merely smirked, swatting the beam aside with ease. "Things change, Frieza," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "I've been doing a little training myself." His aura flared, taking on a brilliant red hue as he activated the Kaioken. Without another word, Raditz charged at Frieza, his movements swift and precise as he lashed out with a probing kick aimed at Frieza's side. The impact was more than Frieza had expected, striking him hard in the ribs. He staggered slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, but he quickly recovered, his own fist shooting forward with deadly intent, driving directly into Raditz's diaphragm. The blow hit its mark, and Raditz's breath left him in a painful gasp. Capitalizing on his advantage, Frieza brought his foot up, slamming it into Raditz's chin and sending him hurtling through the air. Raditz struggled to regain his balance, but before he could steady himself, Frieza unleashed a series of energy blasts that rocketed toward him in quick succession. Raditz crossed his arms in a desperate attempt to shield himself as the blast struck him, one after another, each explosion shaking the air and sending shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. As the smoke cleared, Raditz remained standing, battered but unwavering. His chest heaved, his face smeared with dirt and blood, but he was still very much in the fight. He looked at Frieza with a defiant smirk. "Is that all you've got?" In a flash, Raditz vanished from sight, reappearing behind Frieza with a fierce battle cry, his elbow aimed directly at the tyrant's neck. But Frieza, sensing the attack, turned swiftly, raising his arm just in time to block the blow. With a wicked grin, Frieza retaliated with a blast to Raditz's chest, only for the beam to pass through a fading afterimage. Raditz had already moved. Before Frieza could react, Raditz reappeared above him, bringing both fists down on the tyrant's head, driving him into the ground with incredible force. Dust exploded around them as Frieza's body struck the ground, creating a massive crater. Not wasting a second, Raditz leapt back, gathering energy between his hands, his voice ringing out across the battlefield. "Double Sunday!" he shouted, unleashing a massive twin beam of energy that tore through the air, barreling straight for the downed tyrant. As the smoke began to clear, Frieza rose slowly from the crater, dusting himself off with an amused chuckle. "I must admit, I didn't expect you to give me this much trouble," he said, brushing the debris from his shoulder. "It seems 20% of my power isn't enough for you." His laughter was cold and sinister. Raditz felt a chill run down his spine. 20%, he repeated, disbelief filling his voice. Even with his enhanced strength, he had barely been holding his own, and Frieza had only been using a fraction of his true power. "Well then," Frieza continued with a smirk, "let's see how you fare against 50% of my full strength." With that, Frieza's aura exploded, his power skyrocketing to an intensity that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. Raditz barely had time to register the sudden surge before Frieza closed the distance, backhanding him across the face. The force of the blow sent Raditz flying, his body slamming into a nearby mountain with a deafening crash. A few moments later, Raditz staggered out of the rubble, rubbing the side of his face where Frieza had struck him. He's unbelievably strong," he muttered to himself, feeling the stinging pain radiate through his body. He knew he had to push himself further, beyond any limit he'd ever tried before. He'd seen Kakarot push the Kaioken to X20 in training, but he himself had only managed a stable X10. Raditz clenched his fists, focusing every ounce of energy he had left. If he had any hope of surviving, he'd have to push beyond his limits. "Kaioken, X25, he shouted, his aura flaring red, brighter and more intense than ever before. But the power surge was too much for his body to handle, and within seconds, his aura flickered and faded, leaving him gasping and weak. His knees buckled, and he fell forward, his body trembling from the overload. He had overdone it. His body simply couldn't withstand that level of power. With a sinking feeling, Raditz realized he had no chance left to defeat Frieza. Meanwhile, Denda landed beside Kakarot, who was lying on the ground, barely breathing. The Saiyan was in bad shape, blood pooling around him, and his energy fading fast. Denda's face was filled with determination as he knelt down, placing his hands over Kakarot's body. A soft green glow radiated from his palms, enveloping Kakarot in healing energy. Within seconds, the Saiyan's wounds began to vanish, his strength returning. Kakarot blinked in surprise, pushing himself up and staring at his hands in awe. I'm still alive," he murmured, testing his restored strength. "I thought I was out of senzu beans." "I healed you," Denda said quietly, his voice steady. Kakarot looked at him, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Denda. Now, get somewhere safe," he said gently. Rising to his feet, he turned his gaze toward the distant battlefield where Raditz was fighting. He watched as his brother's aura flared a brilliant red, then quickly flickered out. Kakarot sensed Raditz's power faltering, while Frieza's overwhelming strength continued to grow. Kakarot took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he calculated his own chances. He might be able to match Frieza with the X20 Kaioken, but he knew it would strain him to his very limits. Closing his eyes, he steadied himself, focusing his energy. When he opened them again, he saw Frieza looming over his weakened brother, ready to deliver the final blow. "Kaioken X20!" Kakarot shouted, his aura bursting into a fierce, blazing red. In an instant, he shot toward Frieza, moving faster than the tyrant could react. His foot slammed into Frieza's head, sending the tyrant flying away from Raditz and crashing into the ground, a trail of dust and debris marking the path of his fall.